Harlem, New York, 1932. Imagine living in a neighborhood where calling the police makes things worse, where the judge already knows the verdict before you enter the courtroom, where elections don't change power, money does. Because in Harlem, the law wasn't broken. It was bought. According to financial ledgers leaked to the New York Herald, one man didn't just bribe a few officials, he purchased an entire government, 400 police officers, 23 judges, 47 political officials, every badge, every courtroom, every political office on payroll. And at the center of it all stood a 27-year-old gangster whose name would become legend, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Tonight, we're not telling a rumor, we're not repeating folklore, we're opening the books. This is the story of how Harlem's justice system collapsed. One envelope at a time, low ambient hum, typewriter sounds, distant sirens, and somewhere behind those sounds, an entire city block is holding its breath. Because when the law is for sale, the highest bidder doesn't just win, he owns the rules. The New York Herald has obtained exclusive financial records and testimony from confidential sources that reveal the staggering scope of corruption in Harlem's law enforcement and political institutions. This investigation did not begin with rumors whispered in back rooms or allegations passed quietly between rivals. It began with paper, ledgers, schedules, carefully written records that were never meant to be seen by the public. Documents leaked by a disgruntled insider from within Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson's own organization, a man who knew the system from the inside and decided, for reasons still unclear, to expose how deeply the rot had spread. The documents consist of hundreds of pages of handwritten ledgers detailing monthly and quarterly cash payments delivered across Harlem, payment schedules marked with dates, amounts, and coded identifiers, police officers listed by badge numbers, judges identified by court assignments, political officials referenced by district codes rather than names. At first glance, the records appear cryptic. But when cross-referenced with duty rosters, court calendars, and political appointments, the pattern becomes unmistakable. These were not guesses, these were not exaggerations. They were accounting records, precise, consistent, methodical. The documents reveal a bribery system so comprehensive and so methodical that it represents not isolated incidents of individual corruption, but the complete purchase of Harlem's governmental institutions. This was not a few officers taking cash on the side, not a single crooked judge bending the rules. This was structure, hierarchy, routine, money moving on fixed schedules like salaries, cash delivered openly, predictably, without fear. The ledgers show payments continuing month after month, year after year without interruption, which tells us something even more disturbing. No one was stopping it, no one was questioning it, and no one, at least until now, was willing to expose it. What these documents describe is not corruption at the margins, it is corruption at the core, a system where the appearance of law remained intact, while its function had already been sold. In 1932, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was only 27 years old, but age did not reflect position. By that year, Johnson had already secured control over Harlem's most profitable underground economy. Policy gambling, an illegal lottery played daily by thousands of residents, formed the backbone of his income. Bootlegging during Prohibition added another steady stream of cash. These were not chaotic street operations. They were organized businesses with collectors, enforcers, accountants, and schedules. Johnson was not a reckless gunman chasing notoriety. He was a manager of systems, a man who understood territory, leverage, and loyalty. In Harlem's fractured power structure, that understanding mattered more than brute force. Harlem in the early 1930s was a community under strain. Economic collapse, overcrowding, and systemic racism left residents underserved and over-policed at the same time. Police officers assigned to Harlem were often underpaid, overworked, and resentful. Judges earned modest salaries while handling overwhelming caseloads. Political officials operated in districts neglected by city leadership and starved of resources. Into that vacuum stepped organized crime, not as an alternative government, but as a parallel one. Money filled the gaps where public investment had failed. For officials struggling to survive in a system that offered little reward and even less protection, bribery became rationalized as necessity rather than betrayal. This environment did not excuse corruption, but it explains why it spread so efficiently. Johnson did not invent the weaknesses of Harlem's institutions, he exploited them. and in doing so, transformed neglect into opportunity and opportunity into control. By 1932, Johnson's most valuable investment was not gambling houses or liquor routes, it was the police force itself. 5 precincts covered Harlem, and within those precincts corruption was not selective, it was systematic. The 28th precinct, covering central Harlem, offers the clearest example. According to the ledgers, every sworn officer in that precinct received monthly payments, not as favors, not as rewards for special services, but as standing compensation, like a second salary paid in cash, delivered on schedule, expected, routine. Patrol officers formed the base of the system. 98 officers in the 28th precinct alone, each received $50 per month, an amount that, while modest on paper, represented a significant supplement to an officer's official pay during the Depression. The money was delivered on the first of every month by Johnson's bagmen, men who visited specific bars and restaurants where officers gathered after shifts. No secrecy, no disguises. The payment bought silence, blind eyes, and something more dangerous: active cooperation. Patrol officers ignored Johnson's policy runners openly operating on street corners. They provided advance warning before raids. They arrested competitors' employees on vague charges like loitering or disturbing the peace, and they refused to investigate crimes committed against Johnson's rivals. Above them stood the sergeants, 18 in the 28th precinct. Each received $150 per month. Their role went beyond tolerance. Sergeants coordinated corruption. They decided which officers could be trusted, which officers were wavering, which ones refused payment. They adjusted patrol schedules to ensure that compliant officers were positioned near Johnson's operations. They intervened when complaints surfaced. When citizens reported gambling houses, when arrests of Johnson's men accidentally occurred, cases were softened, reports rewritten, problems made to disappear. Sergeants were the glue that held the system together. Lieutenants received $400 per month. 8 men with authority over shifts, investigations, and paperwork. They ensured that detectives assigned to Johnson-related cases conducted what the ledgers describe as perfunctory investigations. Evidence was lost. Witnesses were never contacted. Arrest reports were weakened before reaching prosecutors. Lieutenants also served as intelligence conduits, filtering information about federal interest, Treasury agents, early FBI inquiries, anything that might threaten the operation. Warnings flowed upward to Johnson long before danger arrived. At the top sat the captains, 2 men commanding day and night shifts, each paid $2,500 per month, the highest payments for the most power. Captains controlled raid schedules, personnel assignments, and communication with higher authorities. They ensured raids were announced days in advance. They isolated honest officers by assigning them to desk duty or quiet areas. They suppressed reports that could trigger investigations. They used police resources to monitor rival criminals. Turning law enforcement into a private intelligence service, this was not accidental corruption, it was command-level control. This is not a few bad apples. This is the entire barrel being purchased wholesale. The monthly cost for the 28th precinct alone reached $15,800, nearly $190,000 per year, and the pattern repeated across the 29th, 30th, 32nd, and 34th precincts. 427 officers across Harlem received payments, roughly 85% of all sworn personnel. The police force did not merely tolerate Johnson's empire, it enforced it, protected it, and weaponized the law against anyone who threatened it. There were officers who refused the money, 63 across all precincts. But integrity carried a price. They were marginalized systematically, assigned the worst shifts, the least support. They received no backup on dangerous calls. Their complaints vanished inside internal affairs offices staffed by corrupt superiors. Some were transferred, some pressured to resign, others were threatened. Warnings delivered indirectly, home addresses mentioned casually, family routines referenced just enough to be understood. The message was clear. Resistance was dangerous. Compliance was safer. What emerged was not bribery as an exception, but bribery as policy, a system enforced through incentives and fear, where refusing corruption meant isolation and accepting it meant survival. The police no longer served Harlem's residents. They served the payroll. And once the badge was bought, the law followed. Buying the police protected Johnson's operations in the streets, but buying the courts ensured protection when cases slipped through. Because even the best warning system fails sometimes, Raids happen, arrests happen, and when that happened, Johnson's next line of defense was the bench. The ledgers document payments to 23 judges connected to Harlem's courts, not one or two, not an occasional payoff, a structured network with quarterly deliveries, fixed amounts, and clear expectations. If the police were his shield, the courts were his locked door, a place where charges could vanish without explanation, where evidence could be ruled improper, where justice could be delayed until it died. Municipal court judges formed the first layer, 8 judges receiving $3,000 every quarter. That's $12,000 per year per judge. And here's where the story turns especially cold, because judges' official salaries often sat around $10,000 to $12,000 annually, meaning the bribe could match or exceed the paycheck. Judges earned more from bribes than salaries, meaning justice literally paid better when it was denied. These judges handled the cases most likely to catch Johnson's employees. Misdemeanors, gambling arrests, vice charges. The system didn't need dramatic acquittals, it needed routine dismissals, technicalities, improper warrants, procedural violations, anything that could be used to collapse a case without drawing attention. And when dismissal wasn't possible, the punishment was designed to be meaningless, minimal bail, so men walked free the same day, suspended sentences, probation, fines so trivial they looked like business expenses. For Johnson's operation, municipal court wasn't a threat, it was a revolving door. The second layer was criminal court, 6 judges receiving $10,000 per quarter. That's $40,000 per year each. And I want to be precise here because this is where the numbers matter. 6 judges at $40,000 each equals $240,000 total annually. Not per judge, total. That correction matters because the structure wasn't sloppy. It was calculated. These judges handled felony cases, weapons charges, serious assaults, major gambling operations, cases that could reach Johnson's top lieutenants, and that's why the payments were higher. Because dismissing a felony case doesn't just save a street runner, it protects the leadership. It keeps the machine intact. The ledgers describe outcomes that feel almost unbelievable until you remember who controlled the room. Serious charges dismissed before trial. Key evidence excluded. Witness testimony weakened. Juries instructed so heavily on reasonable doubt that conviction became nearly impossible, even when the facts were overwhelming. And on the rare occasions convictions could not be avoided, the sentences were engineered to preserve usefulness. 2 years, 3 years, just long enough to look legitimate, short enough that men returned still young enough to work. Then comes the third layer, state Supreme Court justices, 9 justices receiving $5,000 quarterly, $20,000 per year each, total annual cost $180,000. And here's the thing about this level, it wasn't just about dismissing cases. It was about control over the entire legal environment. If a conviction somehow survived municipal court and criminal court, if a case reached higher scrutiny, Supreme Court justices had the power to reverse decisions, order new trials, or find technical defects that unraveled everything. They also handled civil cases, competitors suing Johnson, Johnson suing competitors, disputes over property, businesses, seizures. At that level, the courtroom became another battlefield, and the judge became another paid weapon. The justices didn't just protect him after the fact, they helped him shape the rules. They provided informal guidance, a kind of quiet legal consultation on how to structure operations to reduce vulnerability. And their social presence mattered too. A justice seen attending the same events as Johnson, being friendly, laughing, shaking hands, sent a message without words. Don't touch him, not unless you want your career to end. Now let's put the totals together plainly. Municipal court, $96,000 annually. Criminal court, $240,000. Supreme Court, $180,000. That's $516,000 a year spent on judges alone, over $500,000 annually, not to build schools, not to fix streets, not to feed families, but to ensure Harlem's courts protected criminals instead of prosecuting them. And that's why prosecution became nearly impossible. Because even when police prevention failed, even when warning failed, even when interference failed, the final gate was staffed by men who had already been paid. In a functioning system, court is where truth has a chance. In this system, court was where truth went to die. A case could be solid and still collapse. A witness could be brave and still be ignored. An arrest could be legitimate, and still be erased. Because Johnson didn't just buy outcomes, he bought the process, and once the process was owned, the verdict was never in doubt. Only the paperwork was. Buying police controlled the streets, buying judges controlled the courtroom, but buying politicians ensured the system stayed that way, because laws don't enforce themselves, budgets don't appear by accident, appointments aren't neutral. Johnson understood that lasting protection didn't come from hiding from government. It came from owning it. And in Harlem's political landscape, ownership was surprisingly affordable. City aldermen were the first layer. 5 men representing Harlem districts received annual payments of $10,000 each. In return, city services flowed in Johnson's direction. Licensing decisions favored his establishments. Zoning rules bent quietly to accommodate his businesses. Complaints from residents were stalled or redirected. Reform proposals that threatened police independence or judicial oversight never gained momentum. On paper, these aldermen answered to voters. In practice, they answered to the man funding their political survival. Above them sat state assemblymen, 3 representatives carrying influence far beyond neighborhood boundaries. Each received $15,000 annually. Their value lay in insulation. They opposed legislation that would increase penalties for gambling. They resisted efforts to give state police authority over local enforcement. They promoted home rule not as democratic principle, but as a barrier against outside scrutiny. Perhaps most important, they influenced judicial appointments, ensuring that judges assigned to Harlem were men already receptive to financial persuasion. Long before a robe was worn, loyalty was already established. Then there were the district leaders, 12 political power brokers who controlled nominations rather than offices. They decided who ran, who won primaries, who received party backing. Payments ranged from $5,000 to $10,000 per year, depending on district size and usefulness. Their job wasn't legislation, it was control. They mobilized voters for Johnson-friendly candidates, blocked reformers before elections even began, resolved disputes quietly through political channels instead of courts. In Harlem, power didn't always sit in City Hall. Sometimes it sat in a back room above a social club, and Johnson paid rent there too. Beyond Harlem, the connections widened. Tammany Hall figures, county-level officials, party insiders whose names rarely appeared on ballots but whose influence shaped outcomes. Payments here were smaller, estimated around $15,000 annually, but their purpose was strategic. They provided early warnings about investigations originating outside Harlem. They dampened reform efforts before they gained traction. They ensured that when pressure came from downtown, it arrived softened and delayed. Protection didn't require dominance at every level, just enough leverage to slow the machine. This is why elections didn't matter, because by the time voters cast ballots, the choices were already filtered. Candidates didn't need to campaign for Johnson's support. They needed it to survive. Democracy still existed in form. Ballots were printed, votes were counted, but the outcome rarely changed who benefited. Government didn't fall to criminals overnight. It was leased, term by term, envelope by envelope. And as long as officials already belonged to Johnson, the public never truly had a choice. Corruption on this scale did not survive on money alone. It was enforced. Those who accepted bribes were rewarded with safer assignments, faster promotions, and protection within the department. Those who refused discovered that integrity carried consequences. Career destruction came first. Officers who declined payments were reassigned to the worst shifts, the most dangerous beats, or buried in desk duty far from the streets. They were denied backup on calls, left alone in situations where hesitation could mean death. Complaints they filed vanished into internal affairs offices staffed by men already on Johnson's payroll. The system made an example of honesty, quietly, relentlessly. The ledgers document multiple cases where resistance was broken through pressure rather than persuasion. Officer Patrick Murphy of the 28th Precinct refused bribes for 3 months in 1931. During that time, he was transferred to one of the most dangerous foot patrol routes in Harlem. He was denied backup during a robbery call and severely beaten. No internal investigation followed. No discipline for the officers who failed to respond. After recovering from his injuries, Murphy began accepting $50 a month. The payments started immediately. The danger stopped just as quickly. The message required no explanation. Officer William Jackson of the 32nd Precinct resisted for 6 months. Then the pressure shifted from the badge to the home. Anonymous phone calls began. His children were followed home from school. Strangers demonstrated knowledge of his family's routines, not threats spoken directly, just enough information shared to make the threat unmistakable. Johnson's representative eventually explained that accepting payment would make the harassment stop. Jackson accepted. The calls ended, the watchers disappeared, and the department returned to treating him like one of its own. This is how corruption became compulsory, not by corrupting everyone willingly, but by making refusal unsafe. Financial incentives drew officers in, career advantages kept them loyal, and fear ensured compliance when conscience interfered. The system did not tolerate dissent, it punished it. Over time, resistance seemed reckless rather than heroic. The few who remained honest were isolated, transferred, driven out. What remained was not just a corrupt force, but a disciplined one, where obedience was rewarded and integrity was treated as a liability. And in that environment, corruption didn't spread, it hardened. The cost of this system was not measured only in money. It was measured in lives disrupted and futures erased. Victims of theft, assault, and violence found no justice because police would not investigate. Complaints vanished. Reports were rewritten. Crimes committed by Johnson's organization simply dissolved into silence. Residents learned quickly that calling the police invited danger rather than protection. Justice was not delayed. It was denied outright. And without accountability, crime became routine rather than exceptional. Legitimate businesses suffered quietly. Shop owners who refused to cooperate faced harassment, false arrests, or sudden licensing problems. Competitors who followed the law could not survive against operations protected by police and politicians. Entire livelihoods collapsed not because of market forces, but because the rules were selectively enforced. Harlem's economy bent toward criminal enterprise because honest work could not compete with protected crime. What should have been a community struggling to recover became a feeding ground for exploitation. Worst of all was the erosion of faith. When courts dismissed truth, when police served payrolls, when elections changed nothing, people stopped believing in law altogether. Government existed not to serve the public, but to facilitate criminal enterprise. And once that belief is lost, it does not return easily. The damage outlived the men who caused it, leaving a community taught that power does not come from rights, but from money and fear. The most disturbing part of this story isn't how much money was paid, it's how cheaply justice sold itself. Harlem didn't lose the law overnight. It lost it slowly, quietly, envelope by envelope. And when corruption becomes routine, it stops looking like crime and starts looking like normal life. This wasn't just the rise of a gangster, it was the collapse of a system. This is Noctivoc's Dark Stories, and this was Harlem, 1932.